What's going on, guys? I'm here with Dustin Cook, my client, friend, videographer
Yeah,
guy.
that's good. That's
Yeah,
good.
that works.
Yeah.
We just recorded the first part of this podcast on his channel. I'm going to link that in the description. We're doing part 2 on my channel. So, Dustin, what do you got for me?
So, do you feel like there's too many generalities in the fitness industry and not enough deviation for certain people's physical abilities and/or
Interesting.
tweaks, for a better lack of a better word?
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of take this in a different direction with
Okay,
that. I think there's too many people that think it's black and white.
that's what I meant.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think there's too many people that think like an exercise is all or nothing, and that there's either I've noticed like the whole optimal movement,
Mhm.
like especially with the advent of TikTok, 'cause there's so much information out there, right?
Yep.
Like there are people out there saying lat pull downs aren't lats,
Mhm.
that kind of stuff. And if you do this exercise, you're losing all your gains, and people really try to sensationalize everything, when in reality, and there's a whole barbell versus machine argument, like that kind of stuff. Really, everything works. It's all about how you apply it.
Mhm.
So I think that's like the biggest issue in the fitness industry right now is people try to sensationalize everything. You know, it's like if you're doing this movement, you aren't growing muscle that way because it's not as optimal, it's not as efficient. And like a bent over row, for example. You know, a lot of people say that's not an optimal back exercise. You can make the argument for that, but at the same time, there's been many a good back been built just by barbells.
Mhm.
You know, so it's like everything that gets kind of on a spectrum. I think people get a little bit too carried by going one way or another and kind of demonize certain things, where in reality, like consistency and hard work is what people need to be talking about. It's not all these little minute details that is going to go over the heads of most people.
Right.
So that's kind of where I feel on that.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
So another sort of related question:
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel that abs mostly come from being lean, or do you think they need to be trained as well?
So I think they need to be both, because they are a muscle just like everything else. You can tell when somebody doesn't train their abs, and again, there's levels to it too, because you can get some good core training just from doing like squat and deadlift or overhead presses, but to really like carve them out and get detail, you have to build muscle in them. And I feel like the more muscle you're able to build in your abs, you don't have to be as lean for them to really pop.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's why they say like skinny guy abs, where like people have to get way down in body fat percentage to be able to like see them.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like if you really get them really bricked out, you can see them at 12%. So yeah, I think it's like definitely a combination of both.
Gotcha.
They're mostly made in the kitchen, but yeah, absolutely train them. Mm-hmm.
How much of your knowledge do you think was based on experience, and how much of it do you think was based on literature?
Yeah, so I think majority of my knowledge, especially in the first like 10 years I was lifting, was all experience. I really started to get into, so I kind of had an unconventional route with this stuff. I've applied a lot of things,
Mm-hmm.
and now I'm trying to go back and figure out why certain things worked and why certain things didn't. So over the last couple of years, it's been, especially since I started my own training business, it's been more going back in time and seeing what worked for me at certain times and what worked for other clients at certain times, and trying to sort of like reverse engineer the methodology. What worked? Why did this work at this time? How can I replicate this to the masses? How can I make this a system so that it's scalable?
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of how I came up with my power train method. Was back in the day when I first got into bodybuilding and powerlifting, I realized that lifting heavy was creating a lot of density and building a lot of good size and quality size in my physique and eating and all that stuff like that. But at the same time, doing all the bodybuilding and volume work that I was doing as my accessories was enhancing my power lifts. So I was able to blend those two things together and pull methods from a bunch of different training programs at different times to be able to create the product that I'm able to create now. And so I kind of had to reverse engineer why everything worked.
Mm-hmm.
And how to make it so it's like scalable to everybody and have both the application and understanding of why it works.
Perfect.
So yeah.
What would you say would be the best calisthenic workouts for people to do if they did not have any equipment? If they wanted to get like a aesthetic physique.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I started in my bedroom doing push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, and bodyweight squats and lunges. Like that's what I did. My parents wouldn't buy me weights when I was 13. So I had to wait until I turned 14 to get my first set of weights. I think I had like resistance bands.
Mm-hmm.
But like I got a lot done with just push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups, and then just doing like stuff like body weight lunges. I mean, you can get, if you haven't trained before, or if you're really short on equipment, you can get a lot done that way.
Especially if you're lean, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because you're gonna grow no matter what you do at that point. You know, because you're in such an anabolic state at that point. So.
Is there a specific muscle group that you've found the majority of your clients have a problem with?
Definitely, I'd say back is probably
Okay.
the hardest. And that's something I always like make sure I get back days in with people, like
Mhm.
the people I train in person, because there's always just a couple little things that we can change to help them get a better connection.
Mhm.
A lot of it's just like understanding which part of the back you're targeting with certain exercises. Like I know for me, it was very mind blowing to learn how to train my upper back versus my lats, and that was kind of a game changer in my back development. And I think a lot of people really struggle with that. A lot of people pull with their biceps
Mhm.
instead of knowing how to connect by pulling, through the elbow into their back muscles instead. So I'd say that's probably number one. And then I'll go a little further and say like movement wise, I would say it's the deadlift.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, there's a lot of little technique changes that can make it a safer and more effective exercise. So I think people, when they come to me, that's where I make a lot of the changes, because bench press is pretty straightforward and squats even more straightforward. Deadlift, there's a lot more going on.
Mhm. So I think the thing that people struggle with the most is cutting. Would you have any specific tips for people cutting?
Yeah. So cutting, I think there's a couple different ways to go about it. The first one is just kind of embrace the fact that you're going to be hungry.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people try and get too cute with it and try to like skip on the basics. There's like ways to mitigate it, but you just kind of have to come to peace with like it's going to be hard in that aspect. I do think one area I think a lot of people goof up on is they think there's a cutting routine and a bulking routine training wise. Your training doesn't have to change that much.
Right.
The one area I think a lot of people mess up is they start adding a bunch of volume in after they cut their calories. The volume is more fatiguing, and it doesn't help you hold on to muscle as well. And that's the whole goal of cutting.
It would actually be the opposite, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, because volume is more fatiguing to you, so it would make more sense to do more volume while you have the calorie surplus, so that way you're able to recover from it and get more out of each rep. Whereas like cutting, like only thing training wise that should change is you keep going heavy because you need to be able to hold on to the much muscle mass as possible. So keep going heavy, cut the volume down a little bit to allow some more recovery, as opposed to just adding in a bunch of supersets and drop sets, because people think more means more toning, more ripped. It's not necessarily true. And then on the nutrition side of things, I think there's two camps of people. There's people who try to get too comfortable with it and keep themselves at too small of a calorie deficit. And I think there's other people who could definitely stand to go a lot into deeper waters with it and not be afraid to really redline it a little bit, especially if you're trying to get competition lean. There's going to be times when you're at 1,500 calories. If that's what it takes, that's what you got to do.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with being on the extreme end of things if you're trying to get extreme results. And then I'd say like the last thing cutting wise is understanding it's okay to have a little bit of extra protein in there. Like I bumped the protein way up for people, and it seems that especially for natural physiques, you're able to hold on muscle a lot better. Because a lot of people stay at like that 0.5 to 1 gram. I think you got to be a little bit higher than that. I've seen great results keeping people a little bit higher than that. So they feel more full with more protein, so they're not as hungry. But then they're also holding on to a lot more muscle mass.
Especially if they're in a stricter deficit.
Yeah. And some people, if you get it in the right area, you're able to get more of a recomp effect where they don't lose that much actual like body weight, but they just put on more muscle and stay leaner. Because there is that thermic effect of protein.
Right.
So you do burn more calories by the more you consume. So that has something to do with it. I think in a really basic sense.
Okay.
All right. So thank you, Dustin, for having me on.
Absolutely.
Hopefully you guys were able to get a lot of value out of those questions. Click the link in my bio for part 1 of this interview. We go over some more fun things. So Dustin, thank you for all your help on everything.
Absolutely.
Appreciate you having me on. We'll see you guys soon. Later.